Good evening, Davos, and welcome to the Hub Culture Icon Evening Show here in Davos 2025. My name is Edie Lush, and I am delighted to be here with you today. If you missed this morning's show, don't worry, it's on YouTube. I kicked off the day with George Vredenberg. We explored the future of brain health and groundbreaking efforts to combat Alzheimer's disease. I also spoke to our partners here at Hub Culture in the Icon Building, Build. We had a look at sustainable construction and the future of living. Inside the Congress Center, just across the way from where we are now, the theme of collaboration in the intelligent age continued to drive thought-provoking discussions. Ursula von der Leyen addressed Europe's green transition. We heard from Olaf Scholz, who outlined strategies for sustainable economic growth, and Vladimir Zelensky called for renewed unity in supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the launch of Oxfam's report, Takers Not Makers, sparked debates about extreme wealth, inequality, and the urgent need for reform in global financial systems. Frankly, it would not be Davos without more discussion about wealth and inequality. I'm delighted that we have the CEO of Oxfam coming up later on the show today. But before that, we're going to sift through the remains of the day with Aldo Faisal and David Shrier, good friends of Hub Culture. And I'm also going to speak a little bit later to Alex Leutner about 3D printing living human cells for liver transplants, wound healing, and breast reconstruction. And we'll also hear from our partner, Chief Operating Officer of Hedera, Shyam Nagarajan. He joins us to explore how decentralized technology is reshaping industries. All of that before the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome to the remains of the day, where we are going to be talking about the day's biggest themes here in Davos and explore what they mean for the future of technology, governance, and collaboration in the intelligence age. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you?
Excellent. Very fine.
All right, good. Well, thanks for coming back. You are both experts on AI. What did you learn, David?
Well, there were a lot of great discussions today about AI. I heard a few things which I thought were interesting that I'll share. So one of them was something very important to remember, which is AI does not need to be perfect. Often good enough can solve some of our problems that we need to address, and this will then let us use AI with lower energy usage, lower cost, and make it more accessible.
For example?
Well, I'm just going to rattle off, but for example, right now people are throwing questions at these giant language models, which are very inefficient from an energy standpoint.
Right.
And so there are various applications of AI where a more narrowly constructed model, maybe one specialized in credit modeling for financial services or healthcare decisioning for healthcare, can make decisions more efficiently with much less energy usage.
Interesting.
Another thing that I heard today, which I thought was pretty cool, was this notion of we need a better metric for AI, and this will help us be aware of some of these costs that it incurs, not just in terms of money or energy, but across the board. Like, let's say, what if we had a metric of answers per ton of CO2? And we started to measure AI performance in this context of sustainability. The last sort of big idea about AI that I heard today is really around helping explain this evolution and our expectations for what AI should do versus what it actually does. And the analogy is flight. Okay, birds and bees fly. so do helicopters. But we don't construct human flight devices the exact same way that a bee flies. And so similarly, we have human intelligence and human thinking. 20 watts of power up here can do all of that thinking that we need. And then you have these gigawatt consuming AI models. So machine intelligence should be measured differently than human intelligence. And what should that look like? And that's something people are still working on.
Interesting. All right, Aldo, what thoughts from you? What have you learned, or how do you reflect on what you heard?
Well, I guess I'm the AI professor on the call, so I was looking for things beyond AI, and I think what's really interesting is what we're seeing in terms of program here around the developing world. So we had a lot of Africa-themed events today. I've met some amazing people. We're also, of course, thinking about AI and how we can empower and enfranchise developing and emerging markets in terms of AI. And one of the challenges here is not just data, but for example, language data, that we can capture African languages and indigenous languages, for example. I've learned about a fantastic initiative that's happening over in New Zealand, where the Maori people organize themselves to collect, digitize their language so it can be made amenable to say, large language models. But the interesting thing here is they put, so to speak, the data that they created themselves as a people into a form of trust. And so if you want to use that data, you need to accept the covenants of the trust. And so far, no big tech wanted to sign up to that covenant.
What are the covenants of the trust?
Well, I guess the covenants of trust, I've not read the covenants in detail, but the spirit is, it's a bit like, stewardship of nature, it's stewardship of data, and that you want to carry that forward. I think these are exactly those type of ideas that we need to carry AI forward equitably for all.
I'm really interested in languages in large language models, because it seems to me that it's either the way that the rich countries, who are mainly Latin speaking, either manage to sort of stomp over the rest of the world forever, so the colonialism to the end, or it's the way that we do get the smaller languages, the smaller cultures remembered, heard, amplified. So I wonder how you reflect on that. How important is it that we continue to have local languages, small languages that only a few people speak, maybe?
So I have a great example. I've met today a representative from Bangladesh, which is the 6th most populous country, and it's, I think, the 5th most spoken language on the planet.
Well, there are 27 languages in Bangladesh.
No, India. Bangladesh has one language, main, and that has roughly 350 million people in total speaking that. And what you're seeing there is the main challenge they have is they don't have good optical character recognition for Bengali script. And that's not a trivial image processing challenge. It's a challenge of really getting enough good training data, because a lot of the books have not been printed on high quality paper. There's not good approach to that. So before they can even talk about Bengali large language models, they need to start digitizing these first. And it's interesting to see how, OCR was solved in Western Latin languages.
OCR?
Optical character recognition, so being able to read the postcode some 15, 20 years ago, basically. And so it's interesting to see how very practical challenges are limiting us going forward.
David, you wanted to come in there. I saw you.
So I sat with the Minister of ICT for Bangladesh. It's one written language with multiple dialects. When people call up, and there are a lot of illiteracy in the country, so when people call up to access government services, they were struggling to come up with AI systems that could recognize all of those different dialects. And so when you have, this sort of
That's
diversity,
spoken systems.
yes,
Yeah.
and when you have diversity of language, again, you have a lot of programmers in Silicon Valley who speak English and they're designing English language systems. You have a lot of countries that don't have the money to pay for those amazing developers to then work with them to program systems that could recognize all those different spoken dialects. And then you have even smaller languages in smaller countries where there just isn't a big enough body of language to program an AI system that's as flexible as ChatGPT, but yet you don't want to lose the language or the AI either.
Well, I think that's interesting, especially because Indian subcontinent has a lot of software developers, right? They're one of the software development houses, so they have the technical expertise to develop, but they don't have the data for their own languages yet, for the written part at least. And that's it's an open challenge that we need to think about how we can best tackle that.
Interesting. All right, what else was on your mind? You I know spent some time thinking about Africa as well.
I think what we're seeing in Africa is a very interesting situation. So, roughly 70% of that continent is on a smartphone, but miles away from a computer. So technology innovation looks very different there. It's low power compute on, say, mostly Android phones, and the solutions that are coming up, they're extremely creative, from running banking systems over exclusively the phone, and all the way to healthcare solutions that manage with very little resources very efficiently what's possible. And I think there's a lot of innovation coming out of there. I'm not just looking at Nigeria, we can go to Ghana and other places where we're seeing a lot of innovation. And I think, again, here it's the question, how can we learn some of these best practices and take them to other parts of the world and spread and popularize them?
How does your work on data sovereignty fit into an African context? Have you worked on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of challenges of accessing all this great big tech is that a lot of countries and people are just handing their data over to the Magnificent Seven companies. And so this is a loss of sovereignty, and it's a loss of an extremely valuable resource. So, Aldo, I think, came up with a really good expression. I don't want to steal your language, so I'll let you say it. But it relates to this issue of how we should adjust our national AI strategies to be oriented towards building more value and less towards, kind of handing the crown jewels off to Sam Altman. So if you want to chime in with because you had a nice turn of phrase on this.
Well, I think the best way of thinking about that, a lot of things that we've seen in the south side of trade was to build up industries that reduce export substitution.
Right.
So, Bangladesh or India built up pharmaceutical industries that didn't need to import expensive drugs. And we need to think about AI and generative AI in the same way, enabling countries from Malaysia all the way to Africa and Latin America to start building up their own technology so they don't need to export vast amounts of resources, funds, to pay for domestic AI problem solutions.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Oh, just building factories rather than being data librarians for the big techs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
His attribution, Professor Aldo Faisal, Imperial College.
Right. We sorted through today. Anything else you want to highlight from today?
Yeah, I mean, this has nothing to do with the topic of AI specifically, but more broadly about how we make change in the world and how we drive forward. It was just from a session here at Hub Culture earlier. Courage is the ability to speak from the head what comes from the heart. I really took that one
Nice.
very
What
meaningful.
does that mean to you?
Well, I think there are a lot of situations we find ourselves in where being silent is the easiest path. And there's a lot of mess if you speak up against injustice or against crime or against someone doing something that they shouldn't be doing. But that's the only way that we evolve.
I love it. Courage is definitely one of my core values. Aldo.
I think it's just worth in this increasingly conflicting multipolar world to see that you spot fantastic conversations on the street. So I saw an Israeli talk to an Iranian,
I love it.
who didn't know each other, and they had an interesting conversation that I almost joined because it was so interesting. So,
Wow.
and I think
Shut
it's this spirit of bringing together and talking to each other.
Yeah.
I think that it sounds cheesy, but it really matters, and it makes a difference. It builds contacts, builds human relationships, and that's what we need.
And this was on my way over here. I had one of those Davos moments. So my father passed away last year,
I'm sorry.
he had been in the thank you. He had been in the energy industry for a long time, and he was one of the people who helped put together Cambridge Energy Research Associates, CERA. And so there's the founder of CERA is a guy named Dan Yergin, who wrote a legendary book called The Prize, which is like the definitive book on the oil industry. So I'm walking down the street innocently minding my own business, and there I run into an old colleague from MIT, and then there's Dan Yergin. And he just kept saying all these wonderful, he had no idea that my father had passed away, but he just kept saying all these amazing things about my father and how he had mentored them when they were putting the business together and helped put them on the map. And it just was a touching moment in one of these unexpected Davos encounters.
What are you guys looking forward to tomorrow? We've got the inauguration tonight. How do you think that will affect conversation tomorrow?
Oof.
Deeply, I think.
Profoundly.
I think
much alcohol will be drunk in this discussion.
I think we need to see what's actually on the schedule that's coming forward. I think it's great that Zelensky spoke here.
Speaking again tomorrow.
And we'll see what's happening out of there. I think we have tomorrow a very interesting journalistic session on early impressions on that. So let's see what some of the world news outlets see of that. I think, again, here I find people are much more measured, and there's so much more happening in the world. You know, prospect of peace in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine, what we can do developmentally in various bits and pieces of the world. Inequalities is a topic that is persisting. More equitable use of data as the fuel of the future industries, of the factories, not the libraries. But and let's see how it plays out.
All right.
I mean, the sort of buzz, so I spoke to a lot of people who are directly affected. So people in the AI world say, as long as Elon Musk is friends with Donald Trump, it'll be good for AI. And as soon as they have a falling out, it will be bad for AI.
Right, that's pretty binary.
I think it's an oversimplification, but yet there's a grain of truth in it. And the people in the crypto crowd are both stunned and thrilled at the same time. I mean, Bitcoin touched 109,000 today. And so there's a bit of disbelief and optimism at the same time in that world.
Interesting. All right. Well, my screen behind me is telling me it's time to move on to our next session. So, lads, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Coming up next, we've got Alex Leutner from Cellbricks Therapeutics. We'll be looking at 3D printing living cells. So stay with us. We'll be right back. welcome back to the Hub Culture Evening News Show. I'm Edie Lush. Thanks for staying with us. Really pleased now to be looking at an interesting form of technology. We're going to be looking at decentralizing technologies, how they are reshaping industries. And joining me to discuss this, very pleased to have Shyam Nagarajan. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me, Edie.
Good. Chief Operating Officer at Hedera. So we're going to look at building trust in global systems. And this is an interesting topic. It's always an interesting one to talk about trust when you're here in Davos, because I do feel like even in the Financial Times this morning, I saw a lack of trust in the old system. So let's explore that. But today we've got the inside the Congress Center, the WEF is emphasizing collaboration for the intelligent age.
Yeah.
So tell me how your technology, decentralized technology, helps foster this idea of collaboration and trust.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're talking about collaboration, decentralization is the perfect form of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Think of in the world where everything is decentralized, but they're all decentralized towards a particular purpose. And how do you achieve the outcome when collaborating with all these decentralized different units? So that's what this particular technology brings in. It's already been demonstrated. I mean, you see Bitcoin today at 107,000.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and it has at least established the capability of what a decentralized system can do.
But is that trust or is that Donald Trump?
Well, it's a bit of both, but I do think, if Bitcoin wasn't impactful and valuable, it would have died 2011, right? Now we are 2024, and it still survived, and still, in fact, a number of countries have put down their critical financial reserves on Bitcoin. So that tells you something.
Who's done that?
Well, there's U.S. is obviously considering it, but so is El Salvador. You got Bhutan. There's a number of other organizations. I mean, states in the United States, but also countries outside of the United States that are doing it as well.
I was surprised actually to find out some of the largest holdings of Bitcoin, of course, are the U.S. government because of all the Bitcoin they've seized from illegal activity.
That is true, and the second highest is China.
Interesting. All right, well, let's talk about how distributed ledger technology in particular rebuilds confidence in governance. How can it rebuild confidence in financial systems?
Well, first, I work for an organization where we are all about good governance. Hedera is built on the premise that we have a governing council that's made up of industry leaders like Google, IBM, Mondelez, University of College of London, and the likes. Large organizations all coming together, forming a council that regulate how this particular technology is used, adopted, changed, and therefore enforced for all the users, adopters. So you're talking about governance in the world of AI, and we want to take this capability of governance. One, it's decentralized. Second, it's permission, but also public, and provide this as an infrastructure for organizations to adopt and build AI systems where they can plug in for their trust capabilities into the DLT layer.
Give me an example. Give me an example of a customer who's doing that, and how are they doing it?
Well, look, I was just talking to a large SI that's doing a project for a public organization. This is they deal with primarily pensions and Social Security. And one of the things that they need is they use AI to make recommendations and make decisions. And part of these AI systems is that they are trained with huge, massive data sets. And these data sets comes from different places within the organizations and oftentimes outside the organizations as well. Things like, what is the cost of change in the markets and the performance of the different funds that's delivered to the pensions, and so on and so forth. So when the AI actually makes a recommendation for a decision, they want to be able to provide full auditability, traceability, transparency, and the ability to show that it's made without any bias and discrimination. And that proof, auditability, can only come when you know where the source of the data came from,
Got it.
who owned that data, and how can you reinforce that trust on that decision by showing that end-to-end traceability of it.
Interesting. What about sustainability? It's obviously a big theme here in Davos. I wonder how when I look at what you do, it's low energy, it's a scalable model. How does that align with the push for greener technological solutions?
Look, everyone, when they think of blockchain DLT, they automatically gravitate towards Bitcoin. Oh, it's such a huge impact
Energy
on the
suck.
energy. Yeah. While using proof of work as the consensus algorithm does that, and so did Ethereum until they switched recently to proof of stake. Hedera is, it uses proof of stake from the beginning and as the lowest carbon footprint from the start. And second, look, we truly believe in sustainability. We have invested enormously in building an open source framework called Project Guardian for organizations to track carbon emissions, scope 3 emissions, and also to be able to tokenize those carbon emissions and offsets and trade and the likes. What we also believe, the future as you go, every organization, enterprise, government, or even small startups have to declare in future, sometimes now voluntary, but in future I think it would be enforced by the regulators that what their footprint is, and to be able to either compensate or offset it internally, externally. They need a framework for doing that. I think what we are doing is to bring trust into that system for sustainability as well. Apart from just being the sustainable and the least carbon footprint with blockchain and DLT technology, we also provide the framework for ESG for organizations to build on top and make it convenient for them to report their findings and get the green stamp.
Interesting. So data security and sovereignty, a big topic here at Davos. I've been discussing it this morning, yesterday as well. As we continue to see nations discuss sovereignty in the digital age, how can you enable that and encourage secure, decentralized data sharing that respects individual and national autonomy?
Well, this is a lot in that question that he asked, so I'm going to try and break this up. Data security is huge. I mean, especially the age of AI, everything is based on data, and if you can't tell where your data came from or if it wasn't compromised, then your whole AI is probably not the right outcome that you're designing. But that said, where does DLT come in, or decentralization technology come in here, is to be able to, one, establish data ownership, right? Wherever your data is, to be able to prove this is where it came from, this is the provenance of it, this is the organization or the individual that actually owns it. Now, second aspect of it is the data residency. And countries worry because they sometimes, previously it was the minerals that were the wealth of the nations and the likes. And now data is becoming the wealth of nations. And organizations and countries are worried if they give up their data, and that applies for individuals as well. So my data is, I can tell you for a fact that some of the social networks are using my data to train their AI, and
It's so annoying.
It is. And
I feel like I give it up for the price of a cup of coffee every day.
I would be happy if price of a coffee was actually paid to me,
Right?
to do that. But there's no vehicle to do that.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the digital identity and connecting it with the data ownership, eventually to the ability to have data security bound around it, is incredibly valuable. And AI has to adopt these standards and technologies in order for organizations to benefit. I do think this is the future, but there is a little bit of enterprises and governments have always had a cautious approach to blockchain and crypto. I think that with the new regulations coming on, I think that frame is changing, but I also think the technology is incredibly valuable to ignore. You can't ignore it anymore.
So coming up in a moment, we've got the CEO of Oxfam, who is talking about the massive inequality issue that we see not only here in Davos, but across the world. How can your technology be scaled up and leveraged to bridge this digital divide, making sure we get fair access to technological advancements?
Well, look, I'm going to start with the basics, right? And I think the basics implies access to the basic needs, which is food, housing, and then education, the likes, right? So with respect to education, I do think one of the issues today is individuals is to be able to prove that I have had a certain experience or educational credential that when I go to an employer that they can accept or verify. I mean, there are background check processes. Oftentimes, you go to LinkedIn, a statistic that I heard today was 70% of the school information or the credential information they have listed is fake. And that makes it, if I were an employer, that makes me double check and revalidate everything. If we start there, that itself is a improvement from where we are. But that's not the only place. I do think, in this new age where everyone, we are talking about age where there's going to be digital labor instead of human labor. Right? And that shifts what value do you bring to the GDP compared to what a machine can do.
Right.
So humans are and have to retool to work together with AI. So I think that education is the first place where you start, and then transitioning into areas where AI can't be really that impactful, and you need personal connection with individuals, decisions and strategies and things like that.
Interesting. All right, Shyam, thank you so much for your continued partnership, also for stopping by the Hub Culture News studio for our evening show. We'll be back in just a few moments. We'll be looking at inequality. We'll also be looking at printing skin. imagine printing living human cells to create functional working tissues for live liver transplants, wound healing, and breast reconstruction. Our next guest up is going to talk us through the incredible potential of bioprinting to address unmet medical needs and give us a glimpse of what's next in regenerative medicine. I am here with the co-CEO of Cellbricks Therapeutics, Alex Leutner. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me and thanks for the invite.
Pleasure, absolutely. So the World Economic Forum, Davos, is all about collaboration in the intelligence age. How does what you do and how you partner in terms of advancing bioprinting technology push innovation forward?
So it's pretty straightforward. So we have a brand new technology. We have further developed it over the last couple of years, and it's now ready to provide and produce living human tissue that can be implanted into humans. And this is actually a big leap for regenerative medicine, but also for transplantational medicine, because since the 1980s, 1970s, nothing really has been further developed or innovated in that space. And this is what we're tackling, and this is what we're trying to do.
So you're innovating the biggest innovation since the 1970s or 80s, which was
the development of immunosuppressive drugs.
Okay.
And then, of course, the development and the starting of the transplantational medicine.
Interesting. So millions of patients, from those with diabetic foot ulcers to liver failure, face pretty dire medical challenges. Tell me about what you're doing and how you're helping these patients, or how you could help these patients.
So, first of all, we have the technology. So we can produce very quickly large chunks of human tissue. And we have proven it, that it works in the lab, but also in vivo already. Here we take living human cells, obviously. They can come from the patient itself. We combine them with our biomaterial, and then with our expertise and with our software and the whole technology platform, we can then create the tissue blocks. Those can incorporate vasculature, for example. And this is important to make sure that it's well received by the host. And whenever there's defective tissue that must be replaced in a human being, our produced tissue is an alternative to replace that and to potentially heal chronic wounds.
Talk to me a little bit more about wounds and how printing the living tissue can help extend somebody's life.
Okay, so in diabetic foot ulcers, these are chronic wounds that not completely heal by itself. Without adding new tissues, but also replacing tissues, these wounds potentially won't ever heal again. And this, in many cases, leads to an amputation. And diabetic patients with an amputation, with diabetic foot ulcer, tend to have a short life expectation, if I can say that. And this is where we want to help.
Interesting. You're also working on livers. Tell me a little bit about that, because you produce mini livers that you're going to be able to put into people alongside the liver that's not functioning so well. Is that right?
Exactly. So there are also many patients out there that are suffering from severe liver disease. And those people mostly require a transplant. But as everybody knows, there's a shortage of enough transplants. And besides tackling the disease itself, it would make a huge difference if we could simply add a larger amount of transplants to the market. And this is exactly what we are aiming for. So we are producing a so-called mini liver that has the same functionality as our liver. It's most probably a little bit smaller than the existing one, but it can help the patient to survive, or especially to give them a little bit more time before he would die from not having a transplant in time, right? So that's the idea behind that.
Interesting. And also breast reconstruction. So tell me what the tissue is that you're developing for that and how that can work.
This is actually, it's more or less the same tissue that we're producing for the wound healing. So yeah, a lot of surgeons are pretty excited about the idea of using the patient own cells for creating fatty tissue, adipose tissue, to reconstruct the breast. This is depending on a little bit on the size actually, but we are producing smaller chunks, and we can also produce larger chunks to help reconstruct breasts in the future.
And it's not printing like I'd imagine a printer going left to right would work. How does it work?
This is one of our major advantages of our technology. So we use light to produce those tissue implants, which has a lot of advantages compared to traditional 3D printing approaches. So we can print like large scale volumes pretty fast, while we are printing very accurately. So this is the main advantage of using light for producing human tissue.
It's fascinating. I wonder what your personal drive is behind this technology. Why did you get involved?
Okay, so I'm an entrepreneur, but also a mechanical engineer, and I had a startup before. I worked on integrating that startup into the corporate space, and at some point I wanted to go back into the startup world. And this is where it was clear to me that I would give or donate one of my kidneys to my younger brother, which made me look heavily into the space of regenerative medicine. And I thought, hey, it would be amazing if I could kind of combine both of what is really important to me and work on this topic. So I was looking for startups in the space, and I was lucky to find Cellbricks and join Cellbricks, and then work with our amazing team on helping people that really, for example, need transplants, but are also suffering from defective tissue.
When do we think you'll see a patient with one of your live tissues?
That's a good question, and also obviously a critical one. Also a tough one for someone in the biotech space, because in terms of regulatory, but also the development pathways, things can happen that you don't foresee. So we're planning to move into the clinic within the next 3 years. Okay. So this is for us the most important milestone, if I can say so. And then we're looking for partners to also kind of help us bringing our innovative tissues and products to the market. And this is also pretty cool that we're here at Davos.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. Good luck finding partners. Hopefully people watching will be interested to connect with you. Come back and let us know how you get on.
Would love to.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. Stay with us, because we will be back with Amitabh, who is the CEO of Oxfam. Let me give you one little fact from their new report, Takers Not Makers. Billionaire wealth surged by $2 trillion in 2024 alone, while poverty rates have barely budged since the 1990s. Stay with us. we are going to close with a very special guest here. Delighted to be joined by Amitabh Behar, CEO of Oxfam. Going to be unpacking Oxfam's pretty shocking findings of their Takers Not Makers report. Billionaire wealth surged by $2 trillion in 2024 alone. Poverty rates have barely moved since the 1990s. So tell me about global inequality in the long term. First of all, just tell me what we've got to do to reverse this, because we're not doing it.
We are certainly not doing what needs to be done. And I think the most important point is that billionaires are a sign of policy failure. They're not to be celebrated. And it is a political choice that we are making. I think that fundamental shift of looking as billionaires as a massively successful project needs to end. And then it's about looking at the whole economy in a different way. Because you talked of the numbers, just to kind of drill that down
Give
a
me
little
some more
further.
numbers, yeah.
4 billionaires being added to the list every week. And what's very important is that this is at 3 times faster rate than the previous year. Last year we thought we'll have 1 trillionaire in a decade, and now we're looking at 5 trillionaires within a decade. And as you said, poverty figures, 3.6 billion people still live below poverty line. There are 733 million who literally sleep hungry. And what is very important to underscore that in the last 5 years, there have been 152 million people who've been added to the list of hungry people. So that's the contrast. And I think we're not acknowledging it adequately. IMF, World Bank keep talking about inequality being obscene, it's reached unsustainable levels, but we are not taking the measures which we know can reverse this trend of inequality.
We talk a lot about extraction of wealth from the global south to the global north, from the poor countries to the rich countries. How can we dismantle these systems of economic colonialism? What should former colonial powers be doing?
Yeah, but let's recognize that colonialism did not end in the previous century. It continues in the form of modern day colonialism. And there are multiple things. You're pretty much extracting $30 million dollars every hour. That's in 2023. Money getting extracted from the south, largely going to the super rich in the north. And that needs to fundamentally change. Look at how the global wealth is distributed. Almost 70% of the global wealth sits in the north. 77% of the billionaire wealth sits in the north, whereas the population is only 20%. And we need to recognize how this continues. And there are very, very concrete ways of how it's functioning. One, we need to look at the debt trap. 48% of annual budgets by 50 countries goes into debt servicing. That needs to change. And again, most of this money goes to rich creditors from people who sit in London and the US. That needs to change. The transnational corporations, again, extracting profits pretty much on the back-breaking labor of people living in poverty, of the working class across in the South. Just the financial markets that they were designed, the currency of trade, of financial transactions, itself gives such an inherent advantage to the North that last year for $1 of aid that went into the South, actually $4 has come out. So let's get it straight. South is not a recipient. It's actually a huge donor to the global economy.
I wonder what you make of the proposed reforms to the IMF, to the World Bank. There's been a lot of discussion, especially around the climate issue, taking just into account what you were saying about debt, around how we could reform these institutions to create a fairer world, to create a situation where countries were not servicing their debt endlessly every time another hurricane hits and they have to rebuild. What thoughts?
Well, absolutely. That the IMF, the World Bank, which have such phenomenal influence in shaping global economic policies, need to be reformed. There's absolutely no doubt. At the moment, they're not democratic. Belgium, a Belgian citizen, for instance, would have 180 times more vote than an average Ethiopian citizen. As we've created a dysfunctional system where you still have the IMF head being decided by Europe, the World Bank head being decided by the US. This is not a democratic world that we are living in, and that needs to change. So yes, all for reforms. We are happy that the World Bank recently has put inequality as one of its key indicators moving ahead. So that's good. But serious reforms are needed at this juncture.
I cannot help but listening to what is in the background, and it's various patriotic American songs piping in as we hear Donald Trump being inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. Now we've got a billionaire as the president. We've got a billionaire advising him. What does this mean for inequality?
So forgive me for correcting you, not just one billionaire backing him. In the cabinet, there are 13 billionaires.
Okay.
This is going to be the richest cabinet of the US presidencies. So you have now a billionaire president running the largest economy of the world, backed by the richest man in the world. So this is pretty much the jewel in the crown of the global oligarchy. And they've been talking of slashing taxes, particularly on the super rich, on mega corporations, and this is going to fill up inequality much further now. And that is a huge concern that we must really wake up to.
And it doesn't sound to me like there's much chance of redistribution of wealth from the wealthiest in the United States anywhere else in the world. Bad news for economic aid, bad news elsewhere. I imagine bad news for women.
Yes, as in, I'm glad you asked that. Again, as in, I'm very proud of the reports we do. The report that we did 2 years ago actually points out that almost $11 trillion of unpaid and underpaid care work is done by women. And that's the primary engine of the global economy. And then we have already talked about the other inequalities. So women certainly are going to get left behind. And therefore, there has to be a fundamental rethink about what are we trying to do. People need to accept, and I'm glad that at least under the leadership of Brazil, G20 talked about taxing the super rich. There's more conversation about how do we ensure that the top 10% have the same wealth as the bottom 40%. At least something like this needs to be brought in.
How likely is that? How likely is it a global tax?
I'm in the business of working towards a just and sustainable world. And I'm absolutely sure that eventually we'll win. And I work with communities, and I see the resilience communities have. And at this moment, I would actually say that very often in these conversations in the World Economic Forum, we forget about people's power.
Yeah.
It's really people's power which can push back this global oligarchy, this billionaire supremacy, the era of billionaires will be pushed back by people's power, and that's what history has taught us, and I'm very confident it would be women power, it would be young people coming together onto the streets and holding powerful accountable.
What's your one message for anybody watching today? What should they go and do if they're appalled by the report that you put out?
Wake up to the reality. We cannot continue living with the levels of inequality we have. It's absolutely clear. And interestingly, even the World Bank, IMF now agree that this is unsustainable. It is going to lead to political instability, a breakdown of social cohesion, and further concentration of wealth. So wake up, take action. That's what I would say.
All right, wake up and take action. Thank you very much, Amitabh, for stopping by
Thank you.
the Hub Culture News Show here in Davos. This has been the Hub Culture Evening News Show, bringing you everything you need to know. We'll see you back here bright and early at 9 o'clock Central European Time tomorrow.